Welcome back to Bible in a Year or So with Pastor Mandy. I hope that you have been having a good time reading Jeremiah. The book of Jeremiah is one of the most poignant books of the entire Bible. And what makes it so poignant is that Jeremiah is faithful to God, who has given him this terrible message to give to the people of Judah. And he gives it. I mean, he's faithful. He gives it. But he meets with absolutely no success. And he also, the keynote of his entire ministry is conflict. Conflict. If you look in Jeremiah 11, verses 21 to 23, his life is threatened by the people of his own hometown. If you look at Jeremiah 26, verse 24, he is tried for his life after he preaches a sermon at the temple that nobody likes. In Jeremiah 20, verses 1 to 6, we have the story of the priest Pashur, who puts Jeremiah in the stocks overnight. And he did this because Jeremiah preached that Jerusalem was going to be destroyed, which of course it was. But nobody wanted to hear that message, and so Jeremiah put him in the stocks so that everybody who went by could make fun of him and throw things at him, and it was just really, really terrible. Jeremiah 36, he and Baruch have to flee for their life after the king really hates the scroll that they gave him, worth of 23 years of prophecy, and the king cuts it up with a penknife and throws it in the fire. And in Jeremiah 27 and 28, he's publicly humiliated by the false prophet Hananiah. And what he was doing that so ticked off Hananiah is that he was advocating that the people of Judah submit to their Babylonian rulers. And Hananiah just wasn't having any of it, and he said they were going to all go home soon. Well, of course, Hananiah wasn't right. And in Jeremiah 38, he is lowered into the mire on the bottom of a cistern, and he would have died there if the king hadn't sent his servant Ebed-Melech with 3 other guys to drag Jeremiah out of the cistern. So his entire ministry is marked by conflict, which Jeremiah does not go along with very readily. Jeremiah shows the inner struggles of a prophet of God more so than any other prophet. In fact, Jeremiah is in real anguish over the content of his message, which is a message of the destruction that is going to overtake the Judeans who have been so unfaithful in their covenant relationship with God. And he's trying to get them to return to God, but of course they don't. To see this anguish, we're going to look at chapter 4, verses 19 to 22. And we're going to look at chapter 15, verses 10 to 21. And we're going to look at Jeremiah 20, verses 7 to 18. For this reason, Jeremiah is called the weeping prophet. And the book of Jeremiah is a really difficult read because it isn't in any sort of chronological order at all. That's because there was a first scroll that he dictated to his scribe Baruch that sort of summed up 23 years of his prophecies that the king burned up. So Jeremiah dictated a second scroll to Baruch, an expanded scroll. He expanded the content of what he had to say. And then after you've got the scroll that Jeremiah dictated to Baruch, and then you've got it compiled with Baruch's own memoirs. And one of the ways that you can tell that you're reading the scroll that Jeremiah dictated is because he says, the word of the Lord came to me. When you're reading stuff that was from Baruch's memoirs, it'll say the word of the Lord came to Jeremiah. And then there are a bunch of, then there's a third compiler. And actually, there were several hands involved in the third stage of the compilation of the book of Jeremiah. And what these guys had is they had some other prophecies of Jeremiah that had been remembered and written down that got clumped in with Baruch's memoirs and Jeremiah's second scroll. So you have all of this going on, and it's all put together theologically, not chronologically. So you really can't tell what order anything happened in. There's no way to tell the chronological order of Jeremiah. So as you're reading it, remember how it was written, and that what you need to do is you need to get the message that Jeremiah is giving. Now, what we're going to do in class is we're going to look at passages of Jeremiah that are used in worship. We're going to look at Jeremiah chapter 1, verses 4 to 10, which is the story of his call. We're going to look at Jeremiah chapter 2, verses 4 to 13, which portrays God's covenant relationship with his people as a marriage bond. We're going to look at chapter 4, verses 11 to 12 and 22 to 28, where Jeremiah says that the whole land is going to be ruined because Judah forsook God, never mind what the false prophets are all telling them. We're going to look at 13, verses 1 to 11, and we're also going to look at some other examples of symbolic preaching, like all of Jeremiah 18 and 19, Jeremiah 27 and 28, and Jeremiah 32. And these are all examples of symbolic preaching. One of them, Jeremiah 18 to 19, is Jeremiah's visit to the potter's house. And Jeremiah 27 to 28 has to do with Jeremiah making a yoke, which Hananiah smashes. And so Jeremiah makes a yoke out of iron. And we're going to look at Jeremiah 32, where Jeremiah buys a field at a time when nobody is buying fields, as a way of pointing out that God is going to restore his people. God is going to restore his people. In Jeremiah 14, verses 7 to 10 and 19 to 22, which has to do with a drought. And Jeremiah is pointing out that the drought that the people are enduring is actually an indication of their true moral condition, which is all dried up. And in Jeremiah 16, Jeremiah cannot marry and have children. He can't go to funerals. He can't go to marriages. And what's going on is that Jeremiah's personal loneliness is a sign of the loneliness that the Judeans are going to endure. In Jeremiah 18, verses 1 to 11, we've got a section of Jeremiah at the potter's house. And we're going to look at Jeremiah in 18 and 19 in detail. We're going to look at Jeremiah 20, verses 7 to 11, which is a reflection of his spiritual and mental anguish the night that he had to spend in the stocks. We're going to look at Jeremiah 23, verses 1 to 8, which we always read on Christ the King Sunday, which has to do with the righteous branch out of that's going to spring up from the dried up stump of David's dynasty. And it has to do with the coming of Jesus. And it's pointing out about how God is going to do something really tremendous that's going to overshadow what God did when he delivered the Israelites from Egypt. We're going to look at Jeremiah 23, verses 23 to 29, where Jeremiah yells at the false prophets. We're going to look at Jeremiah 26, verses 1 to 16, where Jeremiah preaches, and then is arrested, and then is tried, and then is vindicated. We're going to look at chapter 28, verses 5 to 9, which has to do with the false prophet, Hananiah. Boo, Hananiah. Hananiah is a bad guy. We're going to look at Jeremiah 29, verses 1 and 4 to 14, which is a letter to the exiles, which we read in the liturgical cycle on national holidays like July 4th. We're going to spend a considerable amount of time looking at Jeremiah 31 verses 1 to 34, which we read on some Easter days, we read on every single Reformation day, we read in Lent, we read in Advent, we read during Christmas. And this particular passage, 31, especially verses 31 to 34 out of Jeremiah, is the reason why the Old Testament is called the Old Testament, and the New Testament, or the New Covenant, is called the New Testament. And we're going to look at that. And we're going to look at Jeremiah 32, verses 1 to 3a and 6 to 15, where Jeremiah buys that field. And we're going to look at Jeremiah 33, verses 14 to 16, which have to do with Jeremiah's glorious promises of a restoration. Jeremiah wasn't all bad news. Jeremiah has some wonderful good news in it, because God cannot be untrue to himself. And God is good. And God wishes good things for his people. And God has good things planned, even for the Judeans, glorious things planned. And he has glorious things planned for you as well. So we're going to look also at some hymns that are based on Jeremiah's prophecy. One of them comes out of Jeremiah 8:22, and this is a very loved hymn. There is a balm in Gilead. And we're going to look at Jeremiah 18, verses 5 to 6. And out of this is out of Jeremiah's visit at the potter's house. And out of this comes a wonderful song, Change My Heart, O God, which is a wonderful hymn. We're going to look at some other good stuff where his hymns come out of. We have this week and we have next week where we're going to look at all this stuff. So I hope you finished Jeremiah, or not finished it for tomorrow. I hope you've read through chapter 26 for tomorrow. And then for a week from tomorrow, have read the whole thing. We're not going to get past the pericopes that run up to 26. We're not. So enjoy Jeremiah, and for a week from tomorrow, have finished Jeremiah. And I will look forward to seeing as many of you as can come tomorrow in person. And those of you who can't be with us, I hope that God really blesses your study. Thanks a lot. Bye.